Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, no matter where you are on this fine planet of ours. I am so glad you could join us today. My name is Daryl Prale, and I will be your host today, although I will certainly not be the star. That will be our guest speaker, Brian Mull of November Learning. Today's topic, engaging technology in online pedagogy. And of course, we want you to join us. In fact, let's talk a little bit about how the logistics for this show are going to work. This is how it goes. We are doing this two ways. One, we're using a technology called GoToWebinar. And with that, you'll have a control panel that's clearly visible, probably in your upper right-hand corner. And what you can do is you can actually submit questions in real time to us. And if time permits during the live show, we will take those questions. When I say live show, I mean the main event. So we've budgeted approximately 30-35 minutes for the actual live content between Brian and myself. And then if you still have time to stick around with that, then we're going to go into the questions that you've answered. So all the questions that are coming in, they're going to get asked. And even if for some reason we run out of time and there's more questions than there is time, then we will follow up with you afterwards. So we will get to you and your questions. We want to encourage the conversation. But the control panel is only one way of doing it. We're also doing this in real time on Twitter. So if you have a favorite Twitter client, then we strongly encourage you to get on that client. And with all your posts, reference the keyword phrase #eTop12. You'll see it there on the bottom of your screen. And that way we can track all the conversations. So you can submit your questions both ways, but on Twitter, you can get the extra mile, right? You can go and not just have your questions, but also give us your commentary and say you agree or disagree. So this conversation is going to go two ways, which is really exciting. As I mentioned, my name is Daryl Prale. I'm your host with a firm called Talking Bluntly, and we're helping moderate and produce this event for the folks with academic partnerships. But more than anything, I'm very excited to be joined by Brian Mull. So let me just tell you a little bit about Brian to set the stage. Brian is a former middle school teacher and technology director who has now spent the past 6.5 years with November Learning. As a part of the November Learning team, he's had the opportunity to give keynotes and hands-on presentations in schools and at conferences across the United States, in Canada, in Europe, and in Asia on the topics of critical thinking, motivating students through authentic tasks, and developing collaborative partnerships. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, Daryl. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm really happy that I can be here with you. And today we're going to focus on using technology as a way to engage students in a couple of different ways. But before we kick things off, I want to tell you a little bit of, or actually I want to tell you two different stories that will kind of let you know a little bit about what I do and kind of how I think, as well as will help set the stage for today. So we're switching screens over here.
And while he's getting ready, just remind everybody, as he says some cool stuff, submit your questions in the control panel or use Twitter, #eTop12. Brian, what are we looking at here? Super, thanks.
So right now you're looking at something that was quite a big deal for me several years ago. Back in 2005, I am one of the ones who lived through Hurricane Katrina. So what you're looking at is where that red dot's located is where I lived, and the blue dot is where I worked at the time. And we saw this hurricane coming in and was going to hit our school and where we live, and we all ended up, everyone in our school ended up evacuating to different parts of the United States. And the evening before this storm rolled in, I kind of had this realization that everything that I had put together to keep us united as a community was soon going to go down. Our emergency phone system, our email, our website, everything. And there was a good chance it was going to be going down for quite a while, which in fact it did. It was down from the second week of the school year until about November. So we had a long period of time where we were going to be unable to connect with all of our stakeholders, our constituencies, our teachers, our students, and so on. But I had just learned about the summer prior to Katrina about blogs for the first time, and I learned about Skype for the first time. So I got in touch with our head of school, and I asked him if he would go ahead and allow me to move our website over to this blog that I had just learned about. So I did, and the storm came through and everything went down, And the next morning I woke up, because this blog was being housed up in Massachusetts. The next morning I wake up, and the very first post I put on the blog had 176 comments to it. And that really just blew me away, because that marked really the first time where the internet has provided anyone to be able to contribute content to the web. Before that, it was, you know, the responsibility of someone who knew special programming languages and all that kind of stuff. So we were using the blog to stay in touch with everyone. We were using Skype to have administrative staff meetings. And it was just this amazing tool that kept our community together in a time of crisis. Now, if we fast forward a few years, what you see now is an individual with his face painted, and I don't know if you know the flag of Egypt, but that's the flag of Egypt right there. And you might remember about a year and a half ago all of the protests that were going on in Syria and other places across the Middle East. And during that time, I was really starting to get involved with Twitter, which I thought was at the beginning the most useless tool that I had ever seen before. I had a lot of apprehension about using it. I didn't think there was a lot of value in it. In fact, I signed up and quit Twitter 3 different times because of how pointless that I thought it was. But I had a few events that happened that made me really start thinking about the value that it could have in the classroom, and this was probably the biggest event. I was at home one evening, and you may have been too, watching television when all of a sudden there was going to be a news report given by the president of Egypt, President Mubarak. And one of the things that he talked about during his speech was how he was going to be giving up some of his power across Egypt and some of his powers as presidency, but what he wasn't going to do was step down from his office. So what I did and what I do now when I watch stuff like this happen on the web, you know, we just watched the presidential election taking place, and there were tweets flying all over the world. It was probably one of the biggest tweeted about events in our world's history. But as we watched what was going on in Egypt, I went over and I typed in, I wonder if the people in Egypt are really buying what's going on here. And I wasn't really expecting to get much back from this because I had about 1,500 followers, and none of these followers were from Egypt. Most of them were from the United States. I had a few from Europe, a few from Asia, but no one from Egypt, so I wasn't expecting to get much back. But I did something really special with my tweet, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But what that thing did was it provided me with the ability within about 15 minutes to have a response come back to me from a woman who was in Egypt, and she typed a very simple message. She said, "No, we're not." And that really kind of blew my mind that quickly I made this connection around a world event that was happening. So we started having this conversation going back and forth over Twitter, and through the conversation, I learned that not only was she in Cairo, Egypt, but she was tweeting with me while she was standing in Tahrir Square with the protests that were going on all around her. And you know, the conversation kind of continued. I went to sleep that night, and the next morning I was heading out to Texas to do a workshop with about 20 teachers and about 20 students. And I was told that these students, they were from Texas, never really ventured out of their small town. A lot of them had never even been to Houston or Dallas or Austin or anywhere else in their own state, much less around the world. Instead, I was told they graduated from high school, they got jobs in their community, and they pretty much just stayed there. So while I was sitting in the airport and I was getting ready to fly to Texas, I had this idea of how great it would be if this person from Egypt could talk to those teachers and those students. So I sent her a quick message and asked her if she Skyped in Egypt, and she said, "Oh, absolutely, I Skype all the time." So she went ahead and gave me her contact information and said, "When you do your presentation, give me a call and I'll talk to your students." So I did just that, and the next day I'm in my workshop and I have these students and these teachers sitting there with me, and before we got started with anything, I said, "I want you to meet someone." And I went ahead and did the Skype call, and on the screen from the other side of the world, there's this woman that's sitting there in front of them and able to talk to them about what was going on in Egypt at the time. And it was stuff that the kids really got excited about because it went far beyond what they were hearing about on TV or seeing in the newspapers written at home. They were able to ask her questions like, you know, in Egypt, you want freedom, and that's something we have in the United States. So what does freedom look like to an Egyptian? How will you know when you have it? And these are the deep kinds of critical thinking questions that we really need to start thinking about in our education system. We're now being asked through things like the Common Core to have students think deeply on topics and to have them critically analyze nonfiction text and information coming from global constituencies. So these tools that we have available to us offer us the ability to have these fantastic connections. When I go out into schools, what I see instead is a lot of money, in fact, billions of dollars being spent on educational technology. And my worry is that the money that's being spent isn't bringing us back great information or great capabilities. What we tend to be doing is we're replicating the types of activities that we were doing in the past with our students, just maybe in a newer or faster way. So what I think about when it comes to technology is, what is it that we can do with this technology now that can give us, what can the technology bring us now that would have been hard to bring us before? So what you're looking at right now is the screen about information. Information is one of the big things that the web can provide us with. When I was in school growing up, and when you were in school, if we wanted to find good amounts of information, we had to go to a library. But now we have the world's largest library in front of us that can give us instant access to all kinds of information. But what we have to do is we have to think about what types of information are we getting back. Are we getting reliable information or information that's not so reliable? That's the hard part, because when we talk about books, books generally go through a publisher. Books generally go through an editorial process or something like that. So we have to move forward on this. So when we take a look at information, I'm going to take you to another screen here real quick, and you see this picture about the mouse here. So on this mouse, you see it has an ear growing off of its back. And one of the things that I would do is I would ask teachers, or I'd ask students, how did this ear get there? Who put it there? What was responsible for getting it there in the first place? And the first place that students are generally going to go is they're going to jump on Google and they're going to type something very simple. So I'm going to do that for you here real quick. I'm going to pull up a Google search. And we're going to type something in like ear mouse. I call that the type and pray approach to search, where we type a few words in the blank and we hope what we want is going to come up near the top. But when we do that, some interesting things start to happen. So let's take a look at this here. We're going to look at this first article that generally comes back from Wikipedia. And I have a couple of things that I'm going to have highlighted here for you. So when you look at this article about this mouse, you see here that this mouse had what looked like was a human ear growing on its back, but it was actually a biodegradable mold that was attached to it, and stem cells and cow cartilage was put around this, and the ear flesh kind of developed around the mold. As we go down a little bit further, we see this Dr. Charles Vacanti, who is an anesthesiologist at UMass Medical Center. So that's coming to us from Wikipedia. Now let's look at this other site briefly. This one comes back to us from the BBC, and it has some different information here. So as I pull up my highlights, you'll see this article says that this ear actually grew on the back of the mouse. Instead of Dr. Charles Vacanti, you see a Dr. J. Vacanti. And instead of being an anesthesiologist, you see that he's a transplant surgeon. So we see a lot of information that doesn't agree with one another. Now, what do we do when students are doing research and they come across two different types of sources that have two very different types of information in it? Well, what most students will tell you is, well, you're going to go out and you're going to find a good third source. Well, if we can find two versions of the truth on the web, certainly we would be able to find two versions of backup information as well. So we have to have students think much more critically about how they dig in and find the kind of information that they're looking for. And this doesn't matter whether these are going to be students in your classroom or students in an online course. It doesn't matter. They still have to be able to look critically through this material. So I see that this doctor was at Mass General. When I go back to the Wikipedia article, I see that in the Wikipedia article, this doctor was at the University of Massachusetts. If I keep reading through the articles, I'll also see references to MIT and Harvard and some other places like that. So with that information, what I can do is I can go back to my Google search and I can add some extra things to my search. There's very particular keywords that are given to you that will allow you to go in and tailor your searches a bit better. For example, if I put in site : and then I add either a domain name or an extension, such as edu or harvard.edu, and then click the search button, what I've immediately done is I've narrowed down my results from the millions of results I got before to only 4,600 in this case. But at the same time, the results are going to be much more targeted towards what it was that I was really looking for. Let's look at another example. If students go in and they're doing a search on the American Revolution and causes, they're going to go ahead and they're going to get their 22.1 million results. But as we look through these results, what you're going to notice is that everything in green is coming back from a United States source. And this is a global event. This is something that's going to have another perspective that we can introduce students to. And in this case, that perspective is going to be coming from the British. So if I do a quick search on Google for web country codes, what you would see is that every country around the world has a two-letter country code that goes with its country. And if I go in and type site : and in this case, UK, now all of my results are going to be instantly coming back from this alternative perspective. So as you can see, what I'm having students do is really think critically about the type of information that they want and also who's going to be that best source of information. So those are the two questions I always want to ask when I'm searching the web. Who's going to be my best source, and what kind of information do I really want to get back? Now, if you really want to become a pro with this, I don't have time to show you all of the features that Google offers you, but when you scroll over to the side of a Google search, you'll see this gear button. And when I click on the gear button and go to Advanced Search, you're going to be taken to a page where I can scroll through and I can enter information anywhere on this page and get other types of stuff that's really going to help me. So for example, if I'm searching for information about I want data from the 2000 U.S. Census, I can go ahead and type in 2000 U.S. Census. So I'm typing in a word and a phrase. And then if I want all of my material to come back as a spreadsheet that students would be able to graph, students would be able to chart and things like that, I can go to File Type and choose Excel. And when I search on that now, I can go ahead and I can narrow down all of my results so that it's coming back as Excel spreadsheets that students would be able to open up and would be able to really, really find the types of information that are going to be most helpful to your students. So if you're having students research, whether they're in an online classroom, whether they are in a standard classroom, they're going to be going out on the web and finding material. And we're spending a lot of money out there on databases and all that other kind of information, which are very valuable to students. But if students are researching generally, they're going to go to Google. So we want to make sure that those students have the ability to be able to search through and manage massive amounts of information. Now, the other piece that I find is really important, once we get past information, is in the development of relationships. how can students build relationships that will really allow them to foster good connectivity and get quality information from really important people and people who can assist them, such as experts in different fields, such as authors of books, and even other classrooms that we might collaborate with on a project. I'm going to show you a couple of examples that will help you in building those kind of relationships. The first one that would be beneficial is called ePals. ePals is a place where you can go and find other classrooms to connect with on different projects. So if I go ahead and click on Find Classroom, I can go in and I can search by country, by number of students, the types of collaboration I want to do. So the other day I was working with some Jewish schools in Texas, and we went in and we said we wanted to find classrooms that were located in Israel. So just by doing that one search, I can find classrooms of various age levels of students that I could then connect with, whether it's going to be over email or over Skype or however. Another great tool for doing this is Skype, as I've already mentioned. And Skype already has their own kind of database of people that can give you great information and feedback and give you classrooms that you can take part in projects with. So when you look up at the top, you see, I am a teacher looking for an expert in, and then you put in your topic area. I can change this around and say, I'm a teacher willing to share my knowledge of a particular topic. And once you start finding these individuals, what you can do is then connect with them and come up with your projects that you want to do. So if students, for example, in a science class are learning about pollution and its effect on water systems, well, we send students out into the field with probes where they can measure pH and where they can measure temperature and all this kind of stuff, and they'll generally come back to school and they'll plug that into an Excel spreadsheet where they can go ahead and chart out their data. But what if we started finding classrooms around the world, because there's water sources and there's pollution all over the world, what if we sent them out with videos made by students in your class that demonstrated the types of experiments that they were doing? We had students around the world replicate these experiments, and then instead of using Excel, where only one person can see the data, then what we can do is we can use something like Google Spreadsheet and allow all people to be able to interact and be able to put in their data and get a much larger sample size. This is actually how scientists work. Now finally, one of my best sources of professional development today is Twitter. Twitter has become my #1 go-to source for all kinds of information. But to really understand how Twitter works, what you need to understand is something called hashtags. So you see in this fourth tweet that's on my list right now, there's the word election written in blue, and there's a pound symbol in front of it. That's a hashtag, and that's the organizational structure of Twitter. So when I went in to my conversation with this person in Egypt, the way I was originally able to connect with her is I went in and I found the appropriate hashtags that people were using in Egypt at the time. And the way that I did that is I went up into my search bar and I simply typed the word Egypt. Then as I scroll through this list, I want to see what are the popular Egypt hashtags being used right now. I see Egypt, I see Sinai, I see Egypt again, and I scroll through some more, I see Egypt again, and on down the page. Now at the times where the protests were going on, the two biggest hashtags that were being used, one was the hashtag Egypt, and the other was a hashtag Jan25, which stood for January 25th, or the day that these protests got started. So when I went on Twitter, I typed my tweet to say, I wonder if the people in Egypt are buying this, and I included the hashtag Egypt and the hashtag Jan25. Immediately by doing that, my tweet went beyond the 1,500 followers I had to a global audience, but at the same time it streamlined to a very focused group of individuals interested in one topic. So let me show you how this might be useful to you in your classrooms. We've developed and have published on our website, which you'll get a link to, within our handout section, a handout called Popular Education Hashtags on Twitter. And as I open this up, what you'll see is that there are hashtags for just about any subject area, any educational level, any particular topic, or so on. And these can be used to ask questions or to get resources from people interested in the same types of information that you teach and that your students learn. So my son came home from school one day. He's in junior high school, and he's taking pre-algebra right now. And he's about at the point where he's maxed out the level of what I know about math. So in his problem, we played with it for a while, couldn't figure it out. So I said, we're going to find some people who can help us. So I took out my cell phone, took a photograph of the math problem. We published it on Twitter with the question, who can help my son out with this math problem? And at the end of that question, I included the hashtag MathChat. Immediately when I've done that, I'm able to get an audience that can really focus on math and can help him understand that problem. Now, the other way that this can be used is what another teacher did, and I seem to have a lot of examples from Texas, but this teacher was from Texas as well, is she went to a workshop of mine where she learned about Twitter for the first time. And she went back to school, she taught high school geometry, and she told her students, you know, I just signed up for Twitter. And she was only using this for educational purposes, so she asked her students to sign up and start following what she was going to post. She didn't know quite yet what she was going to post yet, but she was going to come back to it at some point. Then one night she was out at a baseball game, and she posted a very simple message on her feed. Her kids had just finished talking about angles, and she was at a baseball game. So she asked, do you remember where the perfect bunt is? The first one to tell me gets a surprise on Monday. And while she's at the game, students start feeding responses back to her. So she thought that was pretty cool. The next day, or the next game she was at, she posted another question. Can you take this cup and using volume write a warm-up question for our class tomorrow? And students start writing responses back to her. And they're bringing in these ice cubes, and they're talking about sales of items and all this kind of stuff. So really great ways that now students are starting to look at math in the world around them. So she's doing this on a regular basis with her students now, and what she's finding is that the students who have graduated from the year before or have left her class from the year before, now they're coming back and they're still responding to questions even though they're not in her class anymore. So the math has really become a real part of their life now. And it's exciting for the students, it's exciting for the teachers, and exciting for me to even watch the growth that this one teacher has had over a period of time. So in closing, what I really want you to come away with here is that students have a fantastic opportunity now to interact with the world around them in very unique and exciting ways. But what it all comes back to is being able to look critically at information that's out on the web and be able to build strong relationships that will help them to make sense of this information, develop it further, and make great connections for future activities in the classroom. So that's all I have for you, Daryl.
All right, so let me just take control back here. That was amazing, the content. I loved it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple things here, folks. I'm going to tell you, first off, the good news is we've finished right on time. We had scheduled half an hour for the actual main topic, which is very good. So now we're in the Q&A section. And what does that mean? Well, it means Brian has inundated you with a lot of information right now. And he's talked about how you can use technology. And he's used some amazing examples to kind of, I guess, stimulate the conversation. He talked a bit about Skype and in real-world events. He talked a bit about ePals. He talked a bit about Twitter. He talked about Google for researching and not just easy, quick, and dirty researching, but actual critical researching. And he talked about some personal experiences he had, Katrina as an example, about how technology was just real time and connection with lots of people, and how they were exchanging knowledge and ideas and information, and that shaped their points of view, respectively, on both sides. So by now, I'm thinking your head is spinning because you're starting to think about the opportunities and how you can take some of these nuggets to physically, bring to how you teach or how you engage, students. So now it's your chance. You've got Brian here, dedicated. You can ask him any question you want, be as hard as you want. Two ways to do it. One is in the control panel, and go and do that. Just in the question section like you see here and submit, and we're going to get it in real time, and the questions are coming in. But the other way is on Twitter, and you do that by going to your Twitter client, just like Brian mentioned, your favorite, pick your hashtag. In this case, it's hash eTop12, hash eTop12. And if you've been doing that, you've been following the conversation in real time on Twitter, you've been seeing that this has been talked about as we're progressing here. So submit those questions now. It's a golden opportunity. But if you're shy, I'm going to give you one alternative method here. During our Q&A section, I'm going to leave this screen up. So if you want to reach out to Brian, or you want to reach out to myself, you can physically do that via now a somewhat antiquated way. Email. It's wonderful. It still works. But the also thing is, what you saw Brian doing here was flipping back and forth to some resources on their website. For example, all the hashtags that are common around teaching. So under the resources section of the November Learning website, you'll see that. And that's their website right there. If you are a Twitter user, while we're doing this right now, go and follow Brian. You see his Twitter handle in front of you. So we're going to leave that up so you're not feeling rushed. You can do that as you go. Brian, are you ready to start taking some questions from the audience?
Absolutely. I've actually responded to a couple that were in the question area already.
That's great. Then we're going to have that come back live. I mean, they've been going back and forth here. And one more thing, just for the audience. If we haven't shared this with you yet, we will share you with this now. And that is, we're recording this, and we're going to make this available to everybody. So if there's somebody that should see this, they're going to have their chance. All right, Brian. So let me see if I can. I'm just going to, I'm not, there's no order here, Brian. I'm just kind of picking it off. And here's the first question. I think it's probably because it's most recent. You mentioned Twitter. The question was, should teachers, or let me rephrase that, should teachers be connecting with students on Twitter? So I'm guessing they're getting at the question of maybe, liability or what have you. What's your thought on that?
Absolutely, I think so. Now, in the same breath, I'm not saying that I think every student has to have a Twitter account, and that's two very, different thoughts here. So if your students are in, elementary grades, middle grades, and even possibly junior high, what I would recommend is having a classroom Twitter account that the teacher has the login and password for, and maybe in the back of the room you have a computer set up, and take that hashtag list that I showed you and hang it over the computer. And then during the day, as questions come up in class, ask the students, well, what hashtag would be the most appropriate way to get that question out to the world? And then that student can go to the back of the room, can type the question in, and it's something that can be brought back to later. And I think that's even important if the teacher already knows the answer to the question. I think we need to help model for students, what do you do when none of us has the answer to the question? Now, as students get up into the high school grades, at that point, yes, I absolutely think that all students should have a Twitter account and start using some of these skills. Now, as a teacher, if you're going to have your account, if you already use it personally, I would highly recommend that you have a separate account for personal and for professional use, and do not overlap those. I wouldn't be doing, direct messaging one-to-one with students over that. I would really keep it on the whole class type level there.
All right, so there's some great questions here. I love this one here. I'm not sure if it's sarcasm or it's just the way the question is written. So Twitter is more engaging for student responses over a discussion board in an online class? That's the question.
Yeah, and I think they serve two different purposes. I think your discussion board in an online class is going to be much more related to, getting information out and having discussions within a small class group. And I think that has its definite benefits. What Twitter allows you to do, though, is it allows you to get a much broader audience. we would never have been able to get that individual in Egypt who can give us that point of view if we would have been just inside of a class bulletin board system or something like that. Or connecting with another class in the UK about the American Revolution, where perhaps we can, find a classroom who's learning about the American Revolution over there, where they probably don't even call it that, and then be able to set up a debate where our students can debate their students. We wouldn't be able to do that within just an internal system. So I think there's two different uses, and they both have their benefits.
One of the questions coming in here goes back to when you're talking about Google. And the question is the point here that students that have the advanced search tools will be more engaged in learning? Was that one of the points you were trying to make?
Well, I think that's I don't think that in itself does. I think that under the guidance of a thoughtful teacher, absolutely. So if we send students out on the web just to research, they're going to use that type and pray approach to search. I would say that when I go out into schools, 90% of the people who I talk to, whether they be adults, whether they're students, it's just these quick one or two random words that kind of has something to do with their topic. But if a teacher really gets students to think about what is the real question that we're going to ask, what are the ways that we can connect with other individuals around the world, starting to ask those questions and starting to have those students think critically, I think that kind of questioning and that kind of thoughtfulness really does raise the engagement level for students.
Okay, so we're getting some interesting questions here even beyond Twitter. So one of the questions here is asking if you're familiar with a program called ConnectYard that posts to Twitter, Facebook, and email simultaneously. The question is, if you are, how might that fit into your technique? And then I'm going to maybe expand on it a little bit, because I know there's actually been some pushback by now some of the social media engines to allow simultaneous posting. LinkedIn comes to mind. So that's the question, Brian. What are your thoughts on ConnectYard and simultaneous posting?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular one. I do have knowledge about some other little plugins that you can put either into Twitter or into Facebook that will allow you to post to both at the same time. And I do that from time to time, but I don't like to go overboard with it, just because, if you have the same audience in both, you're kind of just duplicating efforts, but at the same time you are getting people to use the tool that they're most comfortable with. One particular tool, and I don't recall the name of it off the top of my head, but it is a plugin that you can put into Facebook or into Twitter, where it will dual post only if you include the hashtag FB after it. Otherwise, it will only go to Twitter. So that's one way that you could do it, where you can post to both. I think there's pros and cons to going both ways.
And when they also have different aspects, right? I mean, Twitter is really 140 characters, whereas Facebook or other venues are more. And let's talk a little bit about that. So, for example, one of the questions we've got here is, at what age should social media be utilized? And the reference here, of course, is Facebook has a minimum age of 13. Some parents don't want their kids on social media because of safety and stalking. And, of course, we're talking about broad spectrum here. But what are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah. First of all, let me say I understand the fear. I don't want to sweep that under the rug. If one student gets hurt or something happens, it's one student too many. At the same time, what we can't do is base policy entirely off of what we see on Dateline on television. What we generally do is we hear the worst of the worst that can happen. Well, really bad things can happen if we don't use social media at all. My fear is what happens if we don't teach our students this at all. And our kids go out, and the ones that they learn from are their peers, who might not be teaching them the best ways of going about this information. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to keep a lot of open doors between myself as the teacher and with parents. And I want to be sure that I'm walking through every step of the way about what we're using and why we're using it. The next thing I'm going to do, like I said with Twitter, I've used Twitter before with first and second grade students. But at the same time, I don't give them a Twitter account because, like you said, that age of 13 it's regulation. It's what we have to do. And then also it's, maturity level, they're not ready for that on their own yet. They have to have guidance. But I want to give them opportunities to take part in using these different kinds of social media tools. So another quick example here, when we talk about something like Skype, am I going to have every student going in and calling people up? No. But one of the first uses of Skype that I heard of was coming from a kindergarten class where they had this one little girl. She moves from India, and she's crying for a whole week, and the parents, the teachers, no one can figure out why she was crying. But what happened was they found out a week later that she was crying because she missed her grandmother. And so what we had to make sure that we did was we had to make sure that these classrooms went ahead and found out that the grandmother had a Skype address. So they set up the opportunity for this little girl to call and talk to her grandmother. Well, when you have one kindergartner who sees her grandmother in the computer, they all do. So what this turned into is they had a grandparents reading program where each week a different grandmother would call into class and read. So now these students, they're not out there using the social media and all that themselves, but they understand that they have the opportunity to connect with anyone in the world. And that's something that can be built upon in a scope and sequence similar to what we put together in a math class or a science class or something like that.
What I love is the technology we're using right now is also engage in this real-time connection you're talking about. In fact, one of the listeners on our show today, I'll just say Alice. Thank you, Alice. Going back to the conversation about sending posts to multiple social media streams simultaneously, Alice brings up the fact that there's an application called Hootsuite that allows you to connect to multiple social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And Alice, you'll get a kick of knowing that, in fact, we're using Hootsuite during this event. So,
and I use TweetDeck, which is very similar.
TweetDeck's very similar. So that's awesome. Now, Brian, we're getting some questions here about mobile learning, and it's a little open-ended, but what's your experience about mobile learning? Anything you can share?
Yeah, I mean, mobile learning is kind of becoming where it's at these days, and it offers a lot of opportunities. Before I kind of get into that mobile learning piece, what I also want to pass on is, a lot of schools are investing money right now into either bring your own device programs or one-to-one programs and things like that. But what I encourage you to think about is, let's not have conversations about one-to-one. Let's have conversations about one to the world, because those conversations are much more interesting. So when we start thinking about one to the world, when we start thinking about what are the ways that we want our students to connect with other people and with information and so on, we have to pick the types of devices that are going to be most appropriate for the types of learning that we're going to be doing in our schools. So, I visit a lot of places where they decide that they're going to go with a one-to-one iPad program. They get all these iPads in their school and they realize, this doesn't do what we thought it was going to do. We need to make sure we really understand the learning design that we want to implement in our schools. And then from that, we want to choose the right device for that learning design. So with all that being said, as far as mobile learning goes, I think the opportunities that mobile learning provides us with are huge. When I first, right before I started the job that I'm doing now, which I've been doing for about 6.5 years now, I was at a school who was very interested in starting to do streaming video for different events, things on field trips and stuff like that. So, before we could even get off the ground to implement this, it was going to cost us around $8,000 to get us a streaming server, to get us, the bandwidth we needed for it and stuff like that. But now we have tools out on the web like Ustream, for example. It's found at ustream.tv, and the letter U, not the word U. And with that device and a cell phone, I could be on a field trip at an aquarium somewhere, see the marine biologist down the hallway, catch up with them, and live stream an interview that I'm recording at the same time, so when I get back to school, I can edit and publish there on the web. So if we're getting mobile technology just for the purpose of, well, let's get something that's a little bit smaller, I don't think that's necessarily the goal. But if the goal is that we're now going to break down the boundaries of our school, get out there in the field and really connect with people in interesting ways, I think mobile learning has huge potential.
So I think somebody here was inspired and intrigued by your story about how you helped your child when you had some math issues through the use of Twitter. And they're asking, can technology be, for lack of a better word, be utilized for bad? In other words, is this going to prevent kids from learning because they can just go out and get the answers online?
Well, I think what it's going to require us to do is we're going to have to change our lessons. And if we're introducing technology, but we're not changing the lesson plan, we're going to run into issues. So take, for example, there's a website, if you're not familiar with it, you might want to check it out. It's wolframalpha.com. If I go to Wolfram Alpha and I type a math problem, it's basically like a search engine. If I type a math problem or an unbalanced chemical equation or something like that into the blank, it goes ahead and it solves that problem for me, and it shows me every step of the process. So if our assignment is go home and do number 1 to 25 odd in your book, a student can ace that assignment and not understand any of the content. So we have to rethink how are we going to present this and have students work through this material. So I mentioned the unbalanced chemical equation. You put an unbalanced chemical equation, Wolfram Alpha balances it for you. So I know a chemistry teacher, and what he would do is he provided students with balanced chemical equations, and they had to unbalance the equation so that Wolfram Alpha could not solve it. So these students were thinking a lot more critically about the types of information that they had learned about to be able to kind of trick Wolfram Alpha so that it couldn't solve it. So what the bigger question is not how do we adapt the technology to us, but how do we adapt ourselves to the technology? Because this technology isn't going anywhere. Our students aren't going to just decide, we don't like this after all. We really have to make changes in our teaching and our whole educational system if we want to see the types of changes that we think are important. Okay,
so getting back on the mobile conversations, that's what happens, Brian. You bring up one topic and then it just brings more on. You got to love that. And folks, we are aware at this point in time that we have exceeded a 45-minute original allocation. If you have to leave, we understand. The questions are rocking. We're having fun answering them. If you can stick a few more minutes, we're going to answer as many as we can here. If you have to go, don't worry. You will get the recording, and you'll be able to see the whole Q&A on demand at your schedule. All right, the question here, Brian, is do you know who is doing research, or of any research perhaps, on the effect of BYOD, and if you're not sure, that's bring your own device, on student cognition or metacognition?
I don't, and honestly, we've looked for some good stuff before, and I don't think there's a lot of it out there because it's such a new area. I think the jury's still out on it. So I'm sorry, I don't.
All right, so let me ask you this. You did have the great chance to bring up the November Learning resources, but on that front, are there any other, I guess, open educational resources that you can share or mention with our visitors today?
Let's see. I mean, really, the way I go through and kind of do my learning for resources is truly through Twitter. So what I think about are some of the big themes. What are the big themes I want students to be able to come away with? So some of those themes could be the critical thinking. They could be global collaboration. They could be building legacy. They could be helping to develop empathy in kids, which is going to be really important when they're working in a global arena. So kind of my learning style that I go through is I think about the big themes, then I think about the related questions to those themes. Once I have that in place, I told you my number one source for going out there and finding information is getting out there on Twitter and asking the questions, using the appropriate hashtags, and getting resources in that way. Because the resources are going to come and go. So trying to keep up with the changes in technology is going to be an endless battle. But if we think about the big themes and how we can address those, it's going to take us much further. But one other place that I can think of just off the top of my head that I also find is really valuable is a website called, it's classroom20.com. So it's written as the number 20, classroom20.com. And it is filled with educators who have this kind of same belief system that I'm sharing with you, and they're all sharing resources and asking questions and so on like that. So I think that would be a good one to take a look at.
And just circling back, way back, I'm going through all the questions, and we actually skipped one here. The question is, does ePals include higher education participants?
I think it does. I can look at that very quickly for you. I think when I did a search a little bit ago in here, if I did find a classroom and search by country, and I'll just pick one here. I did see some earlier that had some higher grade levels, but I do think it's definitely more of a K-12 tool than higher ed. So you may find some, but I don't think it's the focus of their site.
All right. So here's a question. Where does the wiki play in all of this? Because wikis have been around for forever. I mean, has that role changed? You talk to me.
No, I mean, it's another tool. It's a place to organize content. So there's a great website out there called mathtrain.tv. And mathtrain.tv is basically a teacher-created, is this one teacher in Santa Monica, California who built this. It's basically a YouTube of student-created math tutorials. And so, you know, it's a very robust system. A teacher could just as easily take a wiki and link to all of these videos and this other content that students are creating. I know another couple of teachers out in the Midwest who are using a wiki, and instead of their students using textbooks in their class, students are actually using a wiki to build their own textbook. So through the teaching that the teacher is doing and through what they're learning from various resources, they're building their own textbook inside of a wiki. So a wiki really provides you with just an open container that you can fill with anything you want. So depending on the type of lesson you're teaching, depending on the type of product students are building, maybe you're having them put together some kind of portfolio of what they've learned throughout the year. It literally is an open bucket that you can fill with anything. So I think it's a great place to go.
Brian, we could spend all day talking about this. This is a hot topic, and
I do spend all day.
And you do. And because of that, people, now that you know about the power of Twitter, let alone Google and Skype and ePals, if you have not followed Brian Mull, you need to. You see it right there. Just go on your Twitter client. It could be Hootsuite, it could be TweetDeck, it could be Twitter and your iPhone, your BlackBerry, your Android, on the computer, at Brian Mull NL. By the way, that stands for November Learning, in case you haven't figured that part out. And check out their website, novemberlearning.com. Brian, I just want to share with you one of the tweets that was posted. I want you to feel good about your contribution here. The comment says, "This has been a great webinar. I never took advantage of Twitter before, but now my mind is spinning with ideas."
Super.
So,
Super.
Brian, on behalf of everybody here, we thank you so much for your time today and for just engaging us in this conversation and sharing your expertise. Everybody, if you liked this conversation and you want to see it again, perhaps listen to it on your favorite MP3 player, listen to it at home, share it with a colleague, then stay tuned because we will be sending you the links and you can do just that because that's what this is, sharing and growing using technology. Brian, thanks for your time today. We're done here, folks.
And no problem. No problem. I just want to say also, feel free to, send me some tweets, if you have further questions, or, and use that eTop hashtag, and I'll be happy to follow up with that for a time and answer anything else that comes in.
You are so generous with your time and expertise. Thanks again, Brian. That's #eTop12. You saw it and heard it here first, folks. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.